I'll wash your feet, and you'll walk." The little girl's voice was so calm that the entire room seemed to forget how to breathe. Nathaniel Brooks slowly turned his wheelchair toward her. At 48, the white-haired billionaire had spent more than 2 years surrounded by specialists, private therapists, and the finest equipment money could buy, yet no one had ever spoken to him with the quiet certainty of this 8-year-old black girl. Her name was Lily Carter. She stood near the tall windows of his Chicago mansion, wearing a simple blue sweater, white sneakers, and 2 neat braids tied with small yellow ribbons. Outside, snow drifted past the glass in slow, silver lines. Inside, warm lights reflected across polished floors while a fire whispered behind the marble fireplace. Nathaniel looked at Lily, then at the folded white towel resting in her hands. For a moment, nobody spoke. His assistant, Daniel Reed, glanced toward the kitchen as if waiting for someone to explain what was happening. Nathaniel finally smiled. It was not an angry smile. It was the tired smile of a man who had heard every promise imaginable. "You really believe that?" he asked. Lily nodded once. "Yes, sir. And what makes you so sure?" Lily looked at him carefully. She did not seem impressed by the mansion, the expensive suit, or the framed awards covering the walls. Her eyes settled instead on the man behind the wealth. "Because you stopped believing first," she said. Nathaniel's smile disappeared. The clock above the fireplace ticked once. Then again, Daniel lowered his gaze. No business partner, doctor, or family friend had spoken to Nathaniel that way in years. Nathaniel looked toward the window. 2 years earlier, he had been photographed walking into his company's headquarters in a dark blue suit, surrounded by reporters and executives. Now the same man measured his days by appointments, therapy sessions, and the distance between his bedroom and the library. He had learned how to live around the chair. What he had not learned was how to hope beyond it. Lily stepped closer, stopping several feet away. "May I ask you something?" Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "You already did." "Hey." Tiny smile appeared on Lily's face. "Why do you smile when people tell you nothing can change?" Nathaniel said nothing. The fire cracked softly. Lily placed the towel on a nearby table. "My grandmother used to say that sometimes people need someone to believe in them before they can believe in themselves." Nathaniel looked down. For the first time that evening, his expression changed. He was no longer looking at a child making an impossible promise. He was listening to someone who had noticed something everyone else had missed. Lily picked up the small basin of warm water and carried it carefully toward him. "You don't have to believe me tonight," she whispered. "Just let me try to remind you that tomorrow is still yours." Nathaniel stared at her for several long seconds. Then he nodded. "All right, Lily." And somewhere beneath the quiet glow of the mansion lights, the billionaire who had stopped expecting miracles agreed to take one more step toward hope. Nathaniel Brooks had heard that kind of promise before, but Lily Carter was the first person to make him wonder whether he had been listening for the wrong answer. The warm water sat untouched in the small basin beside his wheelchair, sending a faint curl of steam into the quiet library. Outside the tall windows, snow continued to fall over Chicago, softening the city lights beneath a dark winter sky. Nathaniel looked at Lily, then at the folded white towel she had carefully placed on the table. "You really think this will help me?" he asked. Lily nodded, but she did not rush to answer. "I think it can help you remember something." Nathaniel raised his eyebrows. "What?" "That you are still here." The words landed more deeply than she could have known. Nathaniel looked away. For 2 years, people had talked around him. Doctors discussed therapy plans. Assistants discussed schedules. Business partners discussed investments. Even friends had learned to choose their words carefully, as if one wrong sentence might remind him of everything he had lost. Lily did something different. She looked directly at him without pity. She saw the billionaire, but she also saw the tired man behind the title. "I have heard many promises," Nathaniel said quietly. "Doctors promised progress. Specialists promised new possibilities. Therapists promised that patience would matter. Sometimes I believed them." He paused and glanced toward the fireplace. "Then I stopped." Lily sat in the chair across from him. Her small hands rested in her lap. "Why?" Nathaniel gave a quiet laugh. "Because hope gets expensive when you keep buying it." Lily thought about that for a moment. Then she shook her head. "Hope is not something you buy." Nathaniel looked back at her. "Then what is it?" "Something you practice." The room became still again. Daniel stood near the doorway, listening without interrupting. Lily continued. "My grandmother told me that when people feel stuck, They sometimes need one small thing they can still choose. Nathaniel glanced toward the basin. And you think that is washing my feet? No, Lily said. I think the washing is just the beginning. Nathaniel studied her face. There was no grand claim in her voice now. No promise of a miracle. Only a quiet confidence that made him curious. He reached toward the basin, touched the edge with his fingertips, and then pulled his hand back. You know, Lily, most people would be nervous standing in front of me. Lily smiled. Most people see your money first. Nathaniel looked around the enormous library, at the paintings, the bookshelves, the polished wood, and the awards that represented decades of success. Then he looked at Lily again. And what do you see? Lily answered without hesitation. Someone who is tired of being treated like he has already lost. Nathaniel's expression softened. For the first time that evening, he did not have a clever answer. He simply nodded. Lily stood and carefully moved the basin closer. You do not have to prove anything tonight, she said. You just have to let someone care. Nathaniel looked down at the warm water, then closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the guarded expression he had carried all evening was gone. All right, he said. Show me what your grandmother taught you. Lily smiled gently. She reached for the clean towel, and the quiet library seemed to grow warmer around them. Nathaniel still could not walk. Nothing had changed in his legs that night, but something inside him had begun to move. The first thing Lily noticed was that Nathaniel never looked at his own feet. He watched her instead, as though he were trying to understand why a child he had met only minutes ago seemed so certain that he was worth believing in. The library had grown quieter. The fire continued to glow behind the marble hearth, and the snow outside reflected the soft golden light from the windows. Lily carefully placed the basin beside Nathaniel and dipped the clean white towel into the warm water. She wrung it out with both hands, then paused. Do you know why I asked to do this? She said. Nathaniel looked at her. Because you think it will make me walk? Lily shook her head. Not exactly. She gently folded the towel. My grandmother used to care for people when they were sick or tired. She told me that caring for someone is not always about fixing what is wrong. Sometimes it is about reminding them that they do not have to face it alone. Nathaniel remained silent. Those words seemed to reach a place that business deals and medical reports never could. Lily began the simple act of caring for him, slowly and respectfully, without making the moment dramatic. Nathaniel looked toward the fireplace, listening to the quiet rhythm of her movements. After several seconds, he said, My daughter used to sit in this room with me. Lily glanced up. What happened? Nathaniel took a breath. She stopped coming after I stopped trying. Lily's expression softened. Does she think you cannot get better? I do not know, Nathaniel answered. Maybe she thinks I do not want to. Lily considered his words. Maybe she is waiting for you to show her that you still do. Nathaniel looked down at his hands. His daughter, Emily, was 21 and living across town while finishing college. Before his accident, she had been in the library almost every Sunday afternoon. They had read together, argued over which movies to watch, and planned trips they rarely had time to take. After his condition changed, Nathaniel had slowly withdrawn from everyone. At first, he told himself he was protecting them from worry. Eventually, he realized he had simply stopped letting them close. Lily finished with the warm towel and folded it neatly beside the basin. You should call her, she said. Nathaniel gave a small, uncertain smile. Tonight? Yes. What would I say? Lily looked at him with the calm seriousness that had already unsettled his defenses. Tell her you are still here. Nathaniel stared at the phone resting on the table. His hand moved toward it, then stopped. For 2 years, he had made difficult decisions worth millions of dollars without hesitation. Yet making one simple phone call suddenly felt harder than any business decision he had ever faced. Lily did not pressure him. She simply sat nearby. Finally, Nathaniel picked up the phone. His thumb hovered over Emily's name. Then he pressed it. The call rang once, twice, 3 times. Nathaniel almost ended it. Then a young woman's voice answered. Dad. Nathaniel closed his eyes. For the first time in years, his voice carried something Lily had been waiting to hear. Emily, it is me. I think I am ready to try again. Lily lowered her eyes and smiled quietly. She had not changed Nathaniel's body. She had simply helped him open a door he had kept closed for far too long. The next morning, Nathaniel woke before sunrise, but for the first time in months, he did not reach for his phone. He remained still for a moment, listening to the quiet house and the faint hum of the heating system. Then he remembered the phone call from the night before. Emily had stayed on the line for nearly 20 minutes. She had not asked about business, money, or medical appointments. She had simply listened. Before they ended the call, she had said, "I would like to see you today, Dad." Nathaniel had not known how much those words would matter. By 8 o'clock, the library looked different in the morning light. The snow had stopped, leaving the streets of Chicago bright beneath a pale winter sky. Lily sat at the breakfast table with a glass of orange juice and a plate of pancakes, while Nathaniel watched from his wheelchair near the window. Daniel stood nearby, reviewing the day's schedule. "Your first therapy appointment is at 10, Daniel said. "After that, you have 2 business calls and a meeting with the foundation." Nathaniel looked up. "Cancel the business calls." Daniel blinked. "Both of them?" "Yes." "And the foundation meeting?" Nathaniel considered it. "Move it to tomorrow." Daniel slowly closed the folder. "Is everything all right?" Nathaniel looked toward Lily. "I have something more important to do." Lily smiled, but said nothing. A few minutes later, the front door opened. Emily Brooks stepped inside wearing a navy winter coat, a knitted scarf, and snow-dusted boots. She stopped when she saw her father. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Nathaniel said, "You came." Emily gave him a small smile. "You asked me to." She walked into the library and sat across from him. Lily quietly moved to another chair, giving them space. Nathaniel looked at his daughter and took a slow breath. "I am sorry," he said. Emily lowered her eyes. "For what?" "For disappearing while I was still here." Emily's eyes became glassy, but her voice remained steady. "I thought you did not want me around." Nathaniel shook his head. "I wanted you around more than anything. I just did not know how to let you see me when I was struggling." Emily reached across the small table and took his hand. "You never had to hide from me." Nathaniel looked down at their hands. Then Lily spoke from across the room. "That is what I was trying to tell him last night." Emily turned toward her and smiled. "So you are Lily?" Lily nodded. "Yes." Emily looked at her father. "She is the reason you called me?" Nathaniel smiled. "She is one of the reasons." Lily stood and carried the small basin toward the sink. Emily watched her carefully. "What is that for?" Lily answered simply, "To remind him that being cared for does not make him weak." Emily looked at her father again. Nathaniel's eyes rested on the basin for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised everyone in the room. "I want to go to therapy early." Daniel checked his watch. "Your appointment is still more than an hour away." Nathaniel smiled. "Then let us leave early." Lily looked at him. "Why?" Nathaniel glanced toward Emily, then toward the winter morning beyond the windows. "Because I have spent 2 years waiting for the right day." He paused. "I think I finally understand that the right day is the day you decide to begin." Emily smiled. Nathaniel turned his wheelchair toward the hallway. For the first time in a very long time, he was not waiting for someone else to change his life. He was ready to participate in it. By the time Nathaniel reached the rehabilitation center, something inside him felt different. He was still the same man in the same wheelchair, entering the same bright building where he had spent countless hours trying to regain strength. But this morning, he did not feel as though he were arriving to lose another battle. Emily walked beside him, and Lily followed a few steps behind with her small yellow ribbons bouncing gently as she walked. The familiar scent of clean floors and coffee filled the lobby. Nathaniel exchanged a brief greeting with the receptionist, then looked toward the therapy room. Claire Morgan, his physical therapist, was already waiting. She had worked with him for nearly a year and knew his patterns better than almost anyone. When she saw him arrive early, she smiled. "You are early today." Nathaniel nodded. "I am ready." Claire glanced at Emily, then at Lily, and finally back at Nathaniel. "That sounds different." Nathaniel smiled. "I think I am different." The session began with exercises Nathaniel had done many times before. He worked slowly, following Claire's instructions and concentrating on each movement. There was no dramatic transformation. His progress remained gradual, exactly as Claire had explained many times. But something had changed in his attitude. When a movement became difficult, he did not immediately stop. When Claire asked him to try again, he nodded instead of looking away. Lily sat quietly in a chair near the wall, watching without interrupting. After several minutes, Nathaniel glanced toward her. "Are you going to tell me I am doing great?" Lily smiled. "Only if you are." Claire laughed softly. Nathaniel did too. The sound surprised Emily. She could not remember the last time she had heard her father laugh. During therapy, after another round of exercises, Claire asked Nathaniel to rest. He leaned back and closed his eyes. I used to think progress meant getting back to the person I was, he said. Claire answered gently. Maybe progress means discovering who you are now. Nathaniel opened his eyes. Lily looked toward him. That is what I was trying to say. Nathaniel smiled. You are very wise for 8 years old. Lily shrugged. My grandmother says I ask too many questions. Emily smiled. She might be right. The room filled with quiet laughter. Then Claire noticed something unexpected. Nathaniel had shifted forward in his chair without being asked. He was looking at the parallel bars across the room. What are you thinking? Claire asked. Nathaniel took a breath. I want to try standing. Emily became still. Claire studied him carefully. We can work toward that. Today? Nathaniel asked. Claire nodded. With support, and only as far as your body allows. Nathaniel looked toward Lily. The little girl did not say anything. She simply gave him a small nod. Claire helped position everything safely, and Nathaniel placed his hands where she instructed. He leaned forward. His breathing became slower and more deliberate. Emily stood nearby, watching quietly. Nathaniel pushed himself upward with careful effort. For a moment, he was almost there. Then he stopped and returned to the chair. He looked disappointed. Lily walked closer. That was not a failure. Nathaniel looked at her. It felt like one. Lily shook her head. You tried something you were afraid to try yesterday. Nathaniel stared at her words as though they were a new kind of measurement. Not inches. Not seconds. Not distance. Courage. He nodded slowly. Then tomorrow, he said, I will try again. Claire smiled. Emily reached for his hand. And Lily quietly understood that the first real step had already happened, even if Nathaniel's feet had not moved at all. The next morning, Nathaniel returned to the rehabilitation center with a quiet determination that even Claire could feel before he said a word. Emily had driven him across Chicago, while Lily sat in the back seat beside her mother, watching the winter streets pass beneath a pale morning sky. Nathaniel had spent the entire drive looking out the window. For months, he had avoided noticing ordinary things, but now every detail seemed strangely important. The steam rising from a coffee shop on the corner, a man brushing snow from his car, children in colorful coats walking toward school. Life was happening everywhere, and Nathaniel suddenly felt as though he had been sitting outside of it. When they reached the center, Claire greeted him with the same calm smile as the day before. Ready to work? She asked. Nathaniel nodded. More than yesterday. Lily watched from the waiting area while Nathaniel began his exercises. The session was harder than he expected. His muscles tired quickly, and several movements required more effort than he wanted to admit. Twice, he stopped and leaned back, frustrated with himself. Claire did not push him beyond what was appropriate. She simply reminded him to breathe, rest, and continue when he was ready. After a few minutes, Nathaniel looked toward Lily. You are very quiet today. Lily smiled. I am watching. What are you watching for? The moment you stop being afraid of trying. Nathaniel looked away. He knew she had noticed something he had been hiding. He was not afraid of therapy. He was afraid of hope. Hope meant there was something to lose again. Claire asked Nathaniel to move toward the parallel bars. He placed his hands carefully where she instructed. Emily stood several feet away, her hands clasped together. Nathaniel took a slow breath and leaned forward. He pushed himself upward with controlled effort. His arms trembled slightly from exertion, but he remained focused. Claire stayed close, offering steady guidance. Nathaniel held the position for a few seconds before returning to his chair. He looked surprised. That was longer than yesterday, Claire said. Nathaniel nodded. It did not feel longer. Lily answered from nearby. Sometimes progress feels small when you are the one making it. Nathaniel smiled. Then Claire noticed him looking toward the parallel bars again. Do you want to try once more? She asked. Nathaniel hesitated. Emily stepped closer. You do not have to prove anything. Nathaniel looked at her. I know. He paused. I just want to see what happens. The second attempt was slower. Nathaniel concentrated on every instruction. He leaned forward, placed his hands firmly, and pushed upward. This time he remained standing a little longer. Claire counted softly. 1, 2, 3, 4. At 5, Nathaniel returned to the chair. His breathing was heavier, but his face carried something Emily had not seen in years. Pride. Not the pride of a billionaire closing a major deal. Not the pride of a man whose name appeared on buildings. It was the quiet pride of someone who had finally done something he once believed was beyond him. Lily walked over and smiled. You did it. Nathaniel looked at her. For 5 seconds. Lily shook her head. For 5 seconds longer than yesterday. Nathaniel laughed softly. Then his phone rang. It was Daniel. Nathaniel answered and listened for a moment. His expression changed. What happened? Emily asked. Nathaniel lowered the phone slowly. The foundation board wants to know why I canceled the meeting. Lily tilted her head. What will you tell them? Nathaniel looked toward the parallel bars. Then he smiled. I will tell them I finally found something worth making time for. The phone call from Daniel changed the mood of the entire morning. Nathaniel sat quietly in the rehabilitation center, looking at the message on his phone while Emily waited beside him and Lily sat nearby. The foundation board wanted answers. They were concerned about his recent decisions, especially the meetings he had canceled and the attention he was giving to his recovery. For years, Nathaniel had built his reputation on making fast decisions and expecting results. Now, for the first time, he was willing to let other people wonder what had changed. Daniel arrived at the center less than an hour later. He carried a leather folder filled with reports and paused when he saw Nathaniel sitting with Emily and Lily. The board is asking for a statement, Daniel said. Nathaniel nodded. Tell them I will speak to them tomorrow. Daniel hesitated. They want to know whether you are stepping away from the company. Nathaniel looked surprised. No, he glanced toward the parallel bars across the room. I am stepping back into my life. Daniel did not immediately understand. Lily did. She looked at Nathaniel with a quiet smile. Nathaniel continued his therapy session, but something was different. He was no longer thinking about proving himself to anyone. He was thinking about the people who had waited for him to return. After the session, Emily asked if he wanted to go home. Nathaniel shook his head. I want to stop by the foundation office. Daniel looked concerned. You have not been there in months. Exactly. The drive through Chicago was quiet. Snow had begun to melt along the sidewalks, leaving narrow streams of water beside the curbs. When they arrived, Nathaniel entered the building through the main lobby. Several employees looked surprised to see him. Some greeted him warmly. Others simply smiled. He had expected the visit to feel uncomfortable, but instead it felt familiar. He asked Daniel to take him to the old conference room. On the wall hung photographs from the foundation's early years. One photograph showed Nathaniel standing beside a group of children at a rehabilitation center he had helped fund. Lily noticed the photograph and walked closer. You helped them? She asked. Nathaniel nodded. A long time ago. Why did you stop? Nathaniel looked at the picture for several seconds. I thought I had to focus on my own life. Lily studied his face. Maybe helping other people was part of your life. Nathaniel looked at her. Her words reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. Before his accident, the foundation had been more than a charitable project. It had been personal. He had wanted families to have access to rehabilitation services without worrying about whether they could afford them. After his own life changed, he had slowly stopped believing in the work. He had closed programs, canceled grants, and delegated decisions to other people. Now he understood what had happened. He had not only stopped trying to walk, he had stopped walking toward the person he used to be. Nathaniel turned to Daniel. How much money is left in the foundation account? Daniel opened the folder. A substantial amount. Then I want to reopen the rehabilitation program. Daniel looked at him carefully. Are you certain? Nathaniel smiled. More certain than I have been about anything in years. Lily stood beside Emily and watched him sign the first document. It was only one signature, one decision, one small beginning. But Nathaniel knew it meant something larger. He had spent years believing his purpose had ended when his body changed. Now he was discovering that purpose could change too. And as he placed the pen down, his phone vibrated again. A message from Claire had arrived. She had scheduled his next therapy session for the following morning. Nathaniel read it, smiled, and looked toward Lily. Tomorrow, he said. Lily nodded. Tomorrow. The next morning, Nathaniel arrived at the rehabilitation center before the sun had fully risen over Chicago. The streets were quiet, and a thin layer of snow covered the sidewalks. Emily walked beside him as they entered the familiar building, while Lily followed with her mother. Nathaniel felt unusually calm. He knew the foundation decision had created questions, but for once, he was not concerned about what other people thought. He wanted to keep moving forward. Claire greeted him with a smile and checked his progress from the previous sessions. You are building consistency, she said. Nathaniel nodded. I am learning that consistency matters more than speed. Lily smiled from the nearby chair. That sounds like something my grandmother would say. The session began with the usual exercises. Nathaniel worked carefully, resting whenever Claire instructed him to rest. After several minutes, Claire asked him to practice standing again. Nathaniel looked toward the parallel bars. Yesterday, he had remained upright for 5 seconds. Today, he wanted to do more. He placed his hands carefully and leaned forward. Emily stood several feet away, watching quietly. Lily remained seated, her eyes fixed on Nathaniel. Nathaniel pushed upward with controlled effort. Claire counted softly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nathaniel kept going. 6, 7, 8. His breathing became more deliberate, but he stayed focused. 9, 10. Claire smiled. That is enough. Nathaniel slowly returned to his chair. Emily immediately smiled. 10 seconds. Nathaniel nodded, almost surprised by the number himself. Lily walked over. You doubled yesterday. Nathaniel looked at her and smiled. I suppose I did. Then Lily asked a question that changed the mood. Why do you keep looking at the clock? Nathaniel glanced at the wall. Because I have a board meeting this afternoon. Lily shook her head. No. You look at the clock like you are waiting for something. Nathaniel became quiet. Claire noticed the change in his expression. Is there something on your mind? Nathaniel looked toward Emily. There is a meeting at the foundation today. I have not told the board everything yet. Emily asked, what do you need to tell them? Nathaniel took a slow breath. That I want to rebuild the rehabilitation program, and I want families to have access without worrying about the cost. Claire smiled. That sounds important. Nathaniel nodded. It is. Lily looked at him. Then why are you worried? Nathaniel gave a small laugh. Because some people may think I have lost my judgment. Lily answered. Maybe they think you changed. Nathaniel looked at her. I did change. He paused. But I think I finally changed in the right direction. Later that afternoon, Nathaniel entered the foundation boardroom. Several executives were already seated around the long wooden table. The room became quiet when he arrived. Daniel placed the documents in front of him. Nathaniel looked around at the familiar faces. Some were uncertain. Others looked curious. He began by explaining his decision to reopen the rehabilitation program. One board member asked whether the foundation could afford such a commitment. Nathaniel answered calmly, we can. Another asked whether his personal recovery had influenced the decision. Nathaniel looked down for a moment, then smiled. Yes, it reminded me what it feels like to need help. No one spoke. Nathaniel continued. For years, I thought strength meant never needing anyone. I was wrong. Lily's words from the night before returned to him. Being cared for did not make him weak. It reminded him that he was human. Nathaniel signed the final document and closed the folder. When he left the room, Emily was waiting in the hallway. She smiled. How did it go? Nathaniel looked at her and answered. I think they finally understood. Then his phone rang. It was Claire. She had another update about his therapy schedule. Nathaniel listened, smiled, and said, I will be there tomorrow. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice. 3 months later, the first signs of spring appeared across Chicago, and Nathaniel Brooks had become a different kind of man. His recovery was still gradual, and he still used his wheelchair for much of the day, but every morning began with therapy, patience, and a reason to keep trying. The rehabilitation program he had reopened was already serving dozens of families. What had once been an empty wing of the foundation now carried the quiet sounds of children practicing new skills, parents encouraging them, and therapists celebrating progress that could not always be measured in dramatic changes. Nathaniel visited the center often. Lily came with her mother several afternoons each week, and Emily had become a regular presence too. One Saturday morning, Nathaniel sat near the entrance while Lily finished a drawing at a small table. She looked up when he approached. You are early. Nathaniel smiled. I wanted to see something. Lily tilted her head. What? The new therapy room. They walked together through the bright hallway. Sunlight poured through large windows, touching the polished floor with soft golden reflections. Nathaniel stopped outside the room and watched a young patient practicing with a therapist. He remembered the first day he had entered a place like this, convinced that nothing could change. Now he understood that progress did not always announce itself. Sometimes it looked like showing up. Sometimes it looked like trying again after a difficult day. Sometimes it looked like asking someone to stay beside you. Lily looked at him. What are you thinking? Nathaniel smiled. That you were right. Lily laughed. About what? I did not need someone to fix me. He paused. I needed someone to remind me that I was not finished. Lily looked pleased, but then she asked, do you still want to walk? Nathaniel looked down the hallway. More than ever. That afternoon, Claire prepared Nathaniel for another therapy session. Emily waited nearby, while Lily sat quietly with her mother. Nathaniel practiced standing, just as he had done countless times before. He held the position for several seconds, then carefully returned to his chair. Claire nodded with approval. Good work. Nathaniel looked toward Lily. She gave him the same small smile she had given him months earlier. Then Nathaniel said, I want to try something different. Claire listened. What would you like to try? Nathaniel looked toward the parallel bars. One step. Claire considered it carefully and explained that they would only attempt it when it was appropriate and with the proper support. Nathaniel nodded. He understood that recovery could not be rushed. He positioned himself with Claire's guidance and focused on the movement. Emily held her breath, but Lily simply watched. Nathaniel shifted his weight carefully. Then he moved one foot forward. It was a small movement, barely noticeable to anyone who did not understand what it meant. But Nathaniel felt it. He looked down, then up at Claire. Did I do that? Claire smiled. Yes, you did. Emily covered her mouth with one hand, tears filling her eyes. Lily stepped closer. Nathaniel looked at her and smiled. You said I would walk. Lily shook her head gently. No, you decided to. Nathaniel looked down the long hallway. For years, he had believed his life had become smaller because he could no longer move through the world the way he once had. Now he understood something more important. A life was not measured by how quickly someone moved, how much money they had, or how perfectly everything worked. It was measured by the people who stayed, the courage to begin again, and the willingness to help someone else find hope. Months earlier, Lily had carried a small basin of warm water into a quiet library and offered a billionaire something money could never purchase. Not a miracle, not a promise of perfection. A reason to believe again. Nathaniel looked at Lily, then at Emily, and finally toward the open doors of the rehabilitation center. He smiled and took another carefully supported step. This time, no one counted the seconds. They simply watched him move forward.